Taipo fire has now claimed 151 lives. Some netting samples from Wang Fuk Court now found to be below safety standards. And Asia flood toll nears 1,000 with many more missing. Hello and welcome to TVB News. I'm Melissa Hekalea. The Disaster Victim Identification Unit of the police force continued their search for bodies at Taipo's Wang Fuk Court for the third consecutive day. 5 more bodies were found in Wang Chung House today, the first building that caught fire. The fire has killed 151 people as of Monday afternoon. Over 30 people remain missing. Mimo Singhai reports.
Dressed in white protective gear, members of the Disaster Victim Identification Unit, or DVIU, arrived at the deadly fire scene on Monday morning. Sources say the unit started their investigation at the blaze starting point, Wan Sun House and Wan Cheng House. After receiving confirmation from engineers that the 2 burnt blocks were safe to enter, the unit went inside Wan Cheng House at around 10:30 a.m. Speaking to the media in the evening, the police said the unit discovered 5 victims' remains in Wan Cheng House today, making a total of 151 deaths.
There are 104 deceased bodies has already been identified by the families members. 39 bodies are yet to be identified. 所有失聯人士係帶返出嚟嘅。
The visibly emotional officials said the bodies were found in many places within the building, including flats, backstairs, and the rooftop. They said the force aims to complete the search within 3 weeks. At Taipo Community Center, many affected individuals came to apply for relief, but the relief cannot reduce the helplessness of Wang Fuk Court's residents. My emotions have not yet recovered. I have 2 young grandchildren, and I hope my family can move to a proper flat soon, this woman said. This victim said, I'm not too sure what to do at this moment, even though I feel better today than the past few days. Momus 9, TVB News.
The police and the Independent Commission Against Corruption have formed a task force to probe the deadly Taipo fire. Preliminary findings indicate that some individuals were attempting to pass off non-fire retardant netting that covered scaffolding around the buildings as fire retardant netting. 14 people have been arrested as of now, including the directors and an engineering consultant of a construction company. Samantha Lee reports.
As questions mount over who is responsible for the Wang Fuk Court tragedy, the police and the ICAC formed a task force to investigate. They took 20 samples of the protective netting from 4 buildings that burned. Initial examination showed 7 samples failed to meet fire retardant standards. The ICAC noted some of original netting were torn during Typhoon Wipa in July. The suspects replaced the damaged netting with cheaper, non-fire retardant materials from a local supplier, said ICAC Commissioner Wu Yingming. This netting was 75,000 square meters in size, at $54 per roll, which was large enough for the use of all 8 blocks. In late October, a fire broke out at the scaffolding of Chinacam Tower in Central. Fearing the authorities could check the site following that fire, Wu said the suspects bought 3,700 square meters of fire-retardant netting at $100 per roll to cover up some of the substandard ones, in a bid to pass subsequent tests with a mix of nets. Secretary for Security Chris Tan said when the fire was very serious, officers could only collect preliminary samples for testing from low level of Wan Chi House, which was not affected by the fire. Earlier netting tests showed that it met the fire resistance standards. Tan added when the fire was under control, officers collected samples from different locations in the 8 blocks of Wang Fuk Court. Tan vowed to use all means necessary to obtain evidence and bring criminals to justice. Chief Secretary for Administration Eric Chan criticized the suspects for their shameful attempt to save a bit of money while jeopardizing the lives of thousands of residents. The police had apprehended 12 men and a woman for manslaughter, aged between 40 and 77. Meanwhile, the ICAC arrested 12 people on suspicion of corruption. 11 of them were also caught by the police concurrently. Samantha Lee, TVB News.
The government has inspected buildings undergoing exterior wall repairs throughout the city and found 3 buildings with windows sealed using foam board or plastic board. They have ordered these removed. One of the buildings using foam or plastic board for sealing windows is Yikok Court in Shamshui Po. A resident said the windows are sealed and she's scared. Residents hope the foam boards can be removed as soon as possible. Chief Secretary for Administration Eric Chan said as of 11 a.m. on Monday, the Buildings Department had inspected 359 buildings across the city that are reportedly undergoing major renovation, and that 300 buildings had netting installed. Samples were taken for testing in batches with the target of completing the tests before December 7. Xia Baolong, director of the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office, was in Shenzhen today. It's believed that he was briefed on the Taipo fire and the upcoming LegCo elections. President Xi Jinping had instructed the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office and the Liaison Office to support the Hong Kong government in handling issues related to the fire. Xia directed the formation of a task force to go to Hong Kong to assist with disaster relief. Deputy directors of the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office, Xu Qifang and Nong Rong, had earlier arrived in Hong Kong to provide assistance. They also attended a memorial ceremony for the victims of the Taipo fire. Indonesia's president told survivors of last week's devastating floods that help was arriving to those in need as Asian governments scaled up their responses to a disaster that has left more than 1,000 dead in several countries. Hundreds more are missing following flooding and landslides, which killed at least 502 people in Indonesia, 170 in Thailand, and 334 in Sri Lanka. Nazvi Karim with more.
Rescuers in a helicopter assessed the flood damage over Solok in Indonesia's North Sumatra, delivering aid and ferrying the injured to hospitals. In Sibolga, men performed the grim task of trying to loosen mud in the search for victims. The procedure freed several bodies. Hundreds have died in floods across Indonesia's Sumatra and Aceh provinces, with hundreds more missing. Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto visited Sumatra on Monday, pledging to rebuild infrastructure. Some areas of Indonesia remained unreachable because of damaged roads and downed communication lines. Almost 300,000 people in affected areas are displaced. Reports have emerged of people looting supplies in their desperation for relief. At least 12 southern provinces in Thailand are also inundated. The commercial city of Hat Yai in Songkhla province is worst hit. Homes have been gutted down to their bones, furniture overturned, beds soaked, shelves dripping with mud. Prime Minister Anutin Charnvirakul has outlined recovery and compensation plans for the southern part of the country, where more than 1.4 million households and 3.8 million people are affected. Authorities in Sri Lanka said the death toll is likely to rise, with the island nation hit by floods and mudslides across 25 districts. Almost 150,000 people have been displaced and are now housed in temporary shelters. Rescuers are still searching for close to 400 people who have been reported missing. In the Philippines, demonstrators outraged by defective or non-existent flood control projects call for the prosecution of top legislators and officials implicated in the corruption scandal. Protesters in Manila attacked the giant effigy of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Marcos has been scrambling to quell public anger over the massive corruption blamed for substandard flood control projects across the country. Nazvi Karim, TVB News.
U.S. and Ukrainian officials held what both sides called productive talks in Florida about a peace deal with Russia. U.S. President Donald Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio expressed optimism that progress had been made. Daniel Rell tells us more.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with a Ukrainian delegation led by a new chief negotiator in Florida, his home state, for talks he said were meant to create a pathway for Ukraine to remain sovereign and independent. The discussions were a follow-up to a new set of negotiations that began with a fresh U.S. blueprint for peace. Critics said the plan initially favored Russia, which started the conflict with the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and U.S. President Donald Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner were also present representing the U.S. side. Witkoff leaves on Monday for Moscow, where he's expected to meet his Russian counterparts for talks this week. A new chief negotiator, National Security Council Secretary Rustem Umerov, led the discussions for Kyiv. This after the resignation on Friday of previous team leader Andrei Yermak, chief of staff to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, amid a corruption scandal at home. After the talks concluded, Rubio appeared optimistic progress was being made.
We had another very productive session, building off Geneva, building off the events of this week. As I told you earlier this morning, our goal here is to end the war, but it's more than just to end the war. We don't just want to end the war, we also want to help Ukraine be safe forever, so never again will they face another invasion.
Umerov also heralded the talks. He said the U.S. is hearing us, the U.S. is supporting us. Meanwhile, speaking on Air Force One, U.S. President Trump said there was a good chance a deal could be reached despite disruption caused by Ukraine's corruption scandal.
Ukraine's got some difficult little problems. They have some difficult problems, but I think Russia would like to see it end, and I know Ukraine would like to see it end. I said it was going on for 3 years, right? Didn't I say it? For 3 years I said it, so I was way ahead of schedule. But I think that there's a good chance we can make a deal.
Among measures included in Trump's draft peace proposal is the creation of a Ukraine Development Fund to invest in fast-growing industries, including technology and artificial intelligence. The proposal also calls for Washington to cooperate with Kyiv to jointly rebuild, develop, modernize and operate Ukraine's natural gas infrastructure, including pipelines and storage facilities. Russia has repeatedly bombarded Ukraine's energy infrastructure during the war. The earlier 28-point plan, which Trump has since played down as a concept or a map to be fine-tuned, would have imposed limits on the size of Ukraine's military, blocked the country from joining NATO, and required Ukraine to hold elections in 100 days. Negotiators have indicated the framework has changed, but it's not clear how its provisions have been altered. It had initially envisioned Ukraine ceding the entire eastern region of the Donbass to Russia, a sticking point for Kyiv. Dan Rowell, TVB News.
Still ahead, Donald Trump says he spoke with Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela. Pope Leo XIV calls for unity among Lebanon's political leaders. And most Hong Kong residential buildings' fire alarms are manually operated. Welcome back. U.S. President Donald Trump confirmed that he's spoken with Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, but didn't provide details on what the two leaders discussed. This as U.S. lawmakers from both parties say they support congressional reviews of military strikes against vessels suspected of smuggling drugs into the country. Tracy Furness has more.
Speaking to reporters on Air Force One Sunday, U.S. President Donald Trump confirmed he had spoken with the Venezuelan president.
The New York Times reported that you had a phone call with Maduro. Did you?
I don't want to comment on it. The answer is yes.
And can you tell us a little bit about it?
No, I can't do that.
This as U.S. lawmakers are set to look into U.S. military strikes against vessels suspected of smuggling drugs into the United States, citing a report that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth issued a verbal order for all crew members to be killed as part of a September 2nd attack. Lawmakers said they did not know if last week's report by the Washington Post was true, but they said attacking survivors of an initial missile strike poses serious legal concerns. Meanwhile, Reuters reported the options under U.S. consideration regarding Venezuela include an attempt to overthrow President Maduro, and it said the U.S. military is poised for a new phase of operations after a massive military buildup in the Caribbean after nearly 3 months of strikes on suspected drug boats off Venezuela's coast. The Venezuelan government is also calling for the attacks to be investigated by by its National Assembly. The National Assembly President, Jorge Rodriguez, announced at a press conference that following a meeting on Sunday with relatives of the alleged victims, a commission of deputies will be formed to investigate the serious events that led to the murder of Venezuelans in Caribbean waters. This as the air traffic in and around Venezuela is minimal after international airlines last week began to cancel flights to the country. After the Federal Aviation Administration told pilots to be cautious flying around the country because of heightened military activity on the ground. Tracy Furness, TVB News.
Pope Leo XIV began his tour in crisis-hit Lebanon, the second leg of his maiden overseas voyage to the heart of the Middle East, striving to be a messenger of hope. Danny Joe has more details.
The Pope flew to Beirut, capital city of Lebanon, on Sunday as part of a multinational visit that began last week in Turkey. When on board his chartered plane escorted by fighter jets, the 70-year-old once again pressed for a two-state solution for Gaza and said the Vatican could serve as a mediating voice. Upon arriving at the airport, the Pope was greeted by Lebanese leaders and dignitaries. Leo's visit fulfilled the promise made by his predecessor. Pope Francis had planned to visit the Muslim-majority country in 2022, but was unable to because his health worsened. With around one-third of its population being Christian, Lebanon has always been a priority for the Holy See, which sees it as a bulwark for Christians across the region. Despite heavy rain, large crowds swarmed the streets to the presidential palace as the papal convoy moved in a close Pope-mobile. A welcome ceremony was held at the bopped-up presidential palace, where the pontiff met with Lebanon's Maronite Christian president Joseph Aoun, Parliament Speaker Nabi Berri, and Prime Minister Nawaf Salam. In his address, Pope Leo acknowledged the hardships that people have endured and urged them to remain in their country battered by recent conflicts.
Blessed are the peacemakers. You are a diverse country, a community of communities, united by a common language. I'm not simply referring to the Levantine Arabic, by which your great past has left inestimable treasures. Above all, I'm referring to the language of hope, which has always enabled you to start again.
The Pope told Lebanese politicians to engage in the process of reconciliation, saying a culture of reconciliation must come from the top, with leaders willing to put aside personal interests and recognize the common good as superior to the particular. His appeal for dialogue and unity comes amid heightened tensions just days after an Israeli bombardment on Hezbollah in southern Beirut. On Monday, Pope Leo is due to visit the tomb of Saint Charbel, a Catholic saint revered across the region, and the Shrine of Our Lady of Lebanon. His schedule also includes interreligious talks with leaders of other sects, a prayer at the site of the 2020 Beirut port explosion, as well as an outdoor mass on the Beirut waterfront. Danny Joe, TVB News.
In Honduras, 34% of votes have been counted, and conservative candidates Nasri Asfura and Salvador Nasralla lead the contest, with the governing party trailing. The National Electoral Council said that National Party's Asfura, who's backed by U.S. President Donald Trump, has more than 530,000 votes. The Liberal Party's Nasralla has 506,000, while Richie Monsada of the Liberty and Refoundation Party collected almost 256,000 votes. Asfura, 67, ran as a pragmatic politician, pointing to his popular infrastructure projects in the capital. Just days before the vote, Trump endorsed him, saying he would help the U.S. fight narco-communists. Some members of the property management sector said buildings are generally not allowed to turn off the fire alarm system, even during renovation projects. This came after some Wang Fuk Court residents said they did not hear the alarm sound during the fire. Mimo Singhai reports.
Taipo's deadly fire took away the lives of more than 150 people. After the blaze broke out on Wednesday, some survivors did not recall hearing the fire alarm. After initial investigation, the fire services department said the fire alarm at the complex was not turned off, but the alarm failed to go off when authorities tested them. A representative from the property management sector said that companies often will not turn off a fire alarm system for renovation purposes. They said companies must notify the fire services department if they wish to turn off the alarm, and the authorities will require the building to prepare extra fire extinguishers or other related equipment during that period without fire alarm. They further stated that most residential fire alarms in town are manually operated and do not have smoke sensors. Momus 9, TVB News.
The value of retail sales in October is up 6.9% compared with the same month in 2024. This is also the 6th month of successful growth. Retail sales in October are provisionally estimated at $35.2 billion. For the first 10 months of 2025, the value of total retail sales remained at a similar level compared with a year earlier. The value of sales of electrical goods and other consumer durable goods increased by 24.6%. Sales of commodities in supermarkets went down by 1.8%. A government spokesman said the ongoing improvement in local consumer sentiment and sustained growth in visitor arrivals should continue to provide support to retail businesses. That's the news. Thanks for watching. Pearl Magazine's special on the Taipo fire is up shortly. See you then.